yours.
Okay, thanks, Meredith. And thanks to everyone who is joining us today for this is actually the first webinar in the Project Success series of 4 this school year. And we're starting off with the inclusive mindset and sharing the message. So we know that inclusion is important for our students with disabilities, and that requires educators to have that inclusive mindset. But we want to make sure that that mindset is being shared among special educators, general educators, families, paraprofessionals. So we have a great panel of people gathered here today that will be joining us during this presentation, and we'll get into all that here in just a minute, but we're really excited for you to be here. My name is Ashley Quick. I was a special education teacher for about 10 years before joining the Project Success team. And I did take what I call a gap year or 2 or 3, but I've been a subject matter expert with PCG and Project Success for 3 years now. And that's my family, my husband Tony, and our 2 twins, Aaliyah and Jackson.
Perfect. And my name is Meredith Keating-Merck, and I'm the director of Project Success. And I've been with Project Success, I'm starting my 6th year. Before joining the team, I was a special education teacher in Indiana and Florida for 8 years, and then was a building level administrator for 3 as a dean of students and special education coordinator. Most importantly, those are my kiddos. That's my son Lennon, he's 10 months, and my daughter Carlisle, who's 3.5. So what we're going to do today, as I advance the slide here, we're going to share just a little bit about our larger Project Success team, because if you have worked with one of us over a variety of opportunities, you know that we work across the state and we work in schools in person, and we support webinars as well. So you're likely going to come in contact with one of us, and we want you to have a face with a name, as well as, the most importantly, an email contact so that you can get in touch and ask further questions. So Ashley and I have introduced ourselves. We have Amy Howie as well as one of our subject matter experts, as well as Heidi Brett Baker. Both work with our school districts, supporting in person and virtually right now, mostly. We also have on the line today, Mary. You had her introduce herself there just in the beginning, but Mary Baker-Boudissa is our project manager, but she's also our paraprofessional expert, and she has been providing support and webinars for paraprofessionals throughout this semester. Really great content and really well received. And so we've brought her on today to sit on our panel as well. So you may also get correspondence from Mary through the form of email or scheduling. And then beside her is Christine Krieger. And Christine is the glue that holds it all together. And she provides our scheduling and helps support our project management. So just wanted you to have a face with a name. So I'm going to just take a moment, because Project Success is very excited to introduce our larger set of panel. And we were really intentional as we were thinking about planning for inclusive opportunities and inclusive practices to have a panel that supports families, a panel that supports paraprofessionals, and Erica, who's representing the classroom and those day-to-day interactions with parents and paraprofessionals and students to help support those inclusive practices. So I'm going to pass the mic for just a quick introduction from Lesa, Mary, and Erica, and then we're going to hear further from them in just a little bit as they answer some questions and join our panel. So Lesa, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Meredith and Ashley, and for everyone joining us today. My name is Lesa Paddack. I do work for InSource, which is Indiana's Resource Center for Families with Special Needs. I've been with InSource 15 years, and I have been the parent liaison to the Indiana Department of Education for about 10 or 11 of those years. And I am thrilled to be here today because we help families understand the special ed process. And part of that is we work together to build bridges with schools and families and help everyone hopefully come to the kind of services that will help a student be educated in their least restricted environment and reach their full potential.
Thank you, Lesa. All right, Mary, we'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Meredith, and thank you, Ashley. And it's great to be in you all's company today, especially Lesa, glad to be connected with you again and Erica. Um, I work with Project Success also and have been there just a little over 2 years, so just behind Ashley. And my work is largely in just coordinating the projects that we do to support districts around the state and to provide resources and provide support for that. But one of the things that I've really enjoyed doing is engaging with paraprofessionals, because I used to be a paraprofessional in my former life, and just developing content to help support their work as a part of the classroom team and to improve their ability to coordinate and serve alongside the cooperating teacher. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. And Erica, last but not least, Erica Vogel.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I teach at Manchester Junior Senior High School. This is my 13th year teaching and my 5th year at Manchester. Previously, I was at an elementary level in a similar position. So I've kind of had the gamut of working with students from pre-K all the way up through senior plus. So it's really been fun getting to see the whole picture in the school setting and working with families from that very first experience in a school setting clear to, oh my gosh, now I'm leaving that comfort of school and I have to go out into the real world. What am I doing with my kid? And so that's been really fun and interesting to work with everyone with over the years, and getting to work with Project Success over the last few years. And now as a model site here at Manchester has been very rewarding and helped to increase our work with all of my assistants and the assistants throughout our district tremendously.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah, Erica is one of our model sites here for Project Success. So we're very grateful for her experience and her ability to share and join us today. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of background to Project Success. We are a resource center that is statewide, and we're fully funded by the Indiana Department of Education. And our mission and vision is to support students with significant intellectual disabilities. And we do so at no cost for teachers and administrators who reach out and would like some support. And then we also do universal supports like we do today, where we meet and in a virtual space and share information. So we cover a variety of topics. Inclusion and equity is a large piece of our puzzle, but we also support unpacking the content connectors, instruction using the content connectors, which in Indiana are the alternate achievement standards, curriculum mapping throughout the school year, laying out the plan for instruction, and of course, goal writing. And currently in this space, distance learning and virtual learning and making that as engaging as possible for students with significant needs. We typically do this in person at the school district, providing the professional development or in the classroom coaching, but right now we are limited to virtual, and we'll continue to monitor safety and hope to get back out in the schools and in those classrooms. But until then, we will meet virtually and continue to provide great resources. We are one of many resource centers, I should say, here in Indiana. So you've met Lesa, she represents InSource, but across the state of Indiana, we are really lucky that we have the Indiana Resource Network. And what the Indiana Resource Network does is it provides specialized centers to support Indiana teachers and administrators, typically at a small fee or at no cost. So InSource, which Lesa represents with that parent liaison group, they're at no cost for parents, it's at no cost for teachers and administrators to utilize their services. Same with Project Success. We are also joined by the IEP Resource Center, which helps support the IEP system, as well as goal writing and inclusive practices, and Patents, the Patents Project, which supports accessible materials and assistive technology. So if you're not familiar or you're looking for a resource, the Indiana Resource Network is the place to go. Oftentimes the webinars and the opportunities are free, and if you need support, just go to the Department of Education's website and put IRN for Indiana Resource Network, and that'll take you directly there. This is also a live link, so if you would prefer, you can always select that and be taken right there and contact the director or find an email address or visit the website. Speaking of websites, the Project Success Indiana website is where you're going to find all of today's resources, as well as any resources that could support you as an educator or you as an administrator. So on the website, you're going to see two really important tabs at the top. The first is the Resource tab, and it's organized by educator or administrator with specific tools and resources to help guide and support you in your role. There's also district resources there if you work specifically with a project success coach. And there's also distance learning, so that virtual learning supports that are all right underneath that resource tab. The other really important tab is the events tab. And I'm going to just scroll over one slide so you can see the screenshot for this. Underneath the events tab, you will see a webinar link. That will be all of our archived webinars. You'll also be able to see any upcoming events that we have that we're working on or that are coming up in the week that you can join at no cost and follow along with the Project Success team. And then lastly, we have our conferences where we archive all of our materials from when we've presented locally or across multi-states at any type of conference that we provide those resources and tools. So I encourage you most specifically to become acquainted with the resource or the events tab so that you can stay in contact with us. Also, we've added a register button up at the top so you can register for any of our events and join us at no cost. I wanted to just share InSource's website. So it's insource.org. There's three really important pieces that I always go to, so I wanted to share that with you. The first is about InSource. It gives a lot of the background to their team and to their mission and vision as a resource center. Another valuable resource that's on their website is the Parent and Paraprofessional Training link. You're able to join. They do several webinars throughout the school year, and I encourage you to join those webinars. They had the state superintendent join for special education. So there's always places and individuals that are hosted to get information from, and always up-to-date information that are right there for you. So I am going to go on ahead and pass the mic over to Ashley so that she can start to build our background knowledge, and then we will go right into our first panel.
Okay, thank you. So real quickly, I just wanted to touch on what our agenda is for today. We'll look at what inclusion is and what it's not. We'll look at some of the elements of an inclusive mindset and how to share it. And then right at the end, we'll kind of just wrap up and talk about any next steps that you'll all be able to take. I want you to be on the lookout for, go back just a second. Be on the lookout for those two icons. The Navy speech bubble means that we'll be asking to hear your thoughts and experiences about certain topics. So be on the lookout for that. And then the other icon, the colorful share icon, that's going to indicate that there's a tool, a resource, or some kind of idea that can be shared with general educators, paraprofessionals, families, to help share the message. So on a lot of these slides coming up, we tried to make sure there were as many resources as possible that would be appropriate for sharing with those groups. Our objectives are right in line with that, so we'll want you to be able to differentiate between what inclusion is and isn't, and just be able to identify those resources to share. So, an inclusive mindset, like I mentioned, is critical to the implementation of inclusive practices, and it's really important that we're purposeful about implementing those practices. They're not going to happen by accident, right? So that's where that quote comes from. If you've joined us before, you've probably seen some of this before, but it really does set the stage well for what we'll be talking about. And we are expanding some of these as well, as I mentioned, with the resources. So I like that flow chart to the right. Can you be included? Do you have a disability? No, you can be included. Yes, I have a disability. Are you breathing? Yes, you can be included, right? So it's really that easy. And then it's all about what we do with those inclusive practices to make it an accessible experience and a meaningful experience for all. So this slide shows what we're calling the evolution of inclusion. This idea and this graphic comes from Shelley Moore. If you're not familiar with Shelley Moore, I definitely recommend looking her up. She's a great advocate of inclusion. But really the idea behind this graphic is to show how the concept of inclusion has changed throughout the years. So it started off with students who were identified as different, those colored dots that aren't green, being outside, just completely outside the setting of the green dots. And then you can see as you go across those circles, you can see the movement of the colored dots and what that might mean. So then the colored dots were brought together and they were sort of maybe educated separately, but still outside of that setting with the green dots. Then they're brought into the green dots. Then they're mixed within the green dots. And then the last one we look at is, wait a minute, why is it that there's just a bunch of green dots and then this sort of separate set of colored dots? Really, everyone has their own color, right? That goes more to the idea of diversity and really what inclusion is in reality. So the resource that we have for you to be able to share here is a short video from Shelley Moore that describes in a little more detail that idea of the evolution of inclusion. So this is just a quick reference for some things that what inclusion means and what inclusion does not mean. So I think sometimes, especially teachers who haven't had a lot of experience with inclusion, or families, paraprofessionals, anyone who has had either little or limited experience with inclusion, they may have some preconceived notions of what inclusion is. So this is a helpful sort of resource for you to consider what it means and what it doesn't mean. So it's easy, to agree in concept to the idea of inclusion, but I think it's important to point out what it means and what it doesn't mean, as far as it does mean that, for instance, our students are going to be in age-appropriate gen ed classrooms. But that doesn't mean that when we put them in those classrooms, we're just going to dump them in there without careful planning. It means that these students have full membership within their school community. That doesn't mean that just because they get into that gen ed classroom that now that is being a full member, right? We're not going to just sort of isolate them within that classroom. We're really going to work to make sure they're full members. I'm not going to read through the rest of them, but I do think this is a really helpful chart and wanted to just point that out. So yes, here we go. What kind of inclusion are we talking about when we're talking about this inclusion? So I think the most obvious kind of inclusion is that physical piece, right? So in the past, we've kind of patted ourselves on the back for getting kids with disabilities in general education classrooms. Their body is physically there in the same place, as their peers without identified disabilities. And that certainly is a critical step in inclusion, but we also really need to be sure that we're looking at the social pieces and the academic pieces. So not only is it important to be in the same place as same age peers, but we want to make sure that those students are being included and supported in non-academic activities with those peers so that they're learning to interact with those peers, as well as for the academic piece, being exposed to and supported in grade level content. And we can talk more about that in a bit, about what that might mean. But it's important to remember those three pieces. It's not just enough for them to be in the physical space. It's not just enough to have exposure to peers. It's not just enough to have a little bit, some of the academic piece. It's all working together to really make the most meaningful experience. And the resource that we have to share here is an episode of a podcast that reviews sort of what it's like including students with intellectual disabilities in general. So some of the benefits, if you're working with anyone who's a little leery, a little skeptical about, this seems like a lot for our students with more significant disabilities, I'm not sure that this is the best idea. This list here just gives you an idea of some of the benefits that you can share with these people who may be a little bit skeptical. So first, there's benefits that we have listed here for students and for teachers. For students, they're going to be able to have new friendships, and that goes for both students with and without identified disabilities. Their peer group has automatically widened, right, when they're in an inclusive classroom. There's preparation for the quote unquote real world, right? And again, that goes for students with and without identified disabilities. The world is not a segregated setting, right? There isn't a self-contained world somewhere. People with disabilities, people without identified disabilities, they all are inhabiting this world together. And so we all need to be prepared for what that's like to interact meaningfully. And so that's one of the big benefits of inclusion. There's also looking at things like increased motivation for those students. They'll have modeling of expected behaviors. And overall, the research shows that they will have greater success as adults. And then even for teachers, the benefits of inclusion, there's definitely increased collaboration and you're learning new skills. Special educators can learn more of the content side. General educators can learn more of the behavior management and things that are more a little specific to students with disabilities. And then facilitating all of those great benefits for students, that's a benefit for teachers to have that knowledge that you are able to facilitate all of these great things for students. That's a benefit for teachers as well. So myths and facts about inclusive education. This goes along a little bit with the earlier table of what inclusion is and what it's not. But again, these are some ways that you can maybe have some more information to share with people who are a little skeptical. So there's sort of these myths out there, for instance, that when students with disabilities are included, that somehow jeopardizes the education of other students. And the fact is, there's research that consistently documents that there's benefits for all students. I touched on a few of them. There's certainly plenty more. So it's important to remember that there is no jeopardizing going on there. There are benefits all around. There's also an idea here, and this is an important one, I think, to be careful about and be nuanced about, that full inclusion is mandated by federal law. That is not the case. When we talk about inclusion and how important it is, we never want to make it sound like we think all students with disabilities, regardless of their severity or the challenges or all these things that may impact them, should be in a gen ed setting 100% of the time, because inclusion is great and that's what we need. No, that's not it at all. Of course, federal law is mandating that there's least restrictive environment along that full continuum of services. That continuum exists for a reason. There are students who will need perhaps a self-contained setting and things like that. But to the greatest extent possible and appropriate, we really want to make sure that our students with disabilities are included in the general education setting. I'm not going to go over all of these there, but they're great references, I think, to see, if these are some of the things that you're hearing from people who are a little hesitant to include students with more significant disabilities, this may be a useful resource to you. And there's a link down at the bottom where I got these myths and facts from, with some additional information as well.
All right, so we are going to jump right into our first panel. I will turn on my video, and our first panelist will be Lesa. So we will start with the parent perspective and family perspective, and then we will go to Mary, who will be offering the perspective of a paraprofessional, and then we will always end with Erica from that teacher perspective, since that's the majority of where our members will be, today's attendees are kind of leaning towards. So I see Lesa, so we'll just jump right in with the first question, and that is, what message is important to share with families about what inclusion is and is not?
Well, I think one very important thing to share with families is the fact that inclusion, as you already stated, is not the fact that your child with a disability, or particularly with a significant disability, is just placed in a room and not supported. It is absolutely vital for every child to be supported and get what they individually need and what they need at the time. At sometimes a child will need more, and at other times perhaps fewer services. But we know that our students with disabilities, especially those with significant disabilities, are going to need ongoing support. And part of what a family has to understand is that they have not just a seat, but a voice at the table in order to help share what the concerns are they have for their student, to ensure that they have appropriate support, as does the school staff have appropriate support and training to make this a successful partnership, because there will be ups and downs, but it's well worth the effort that it's going to take in order to have everybody together.
Absolutely, absolutely. That support is vital. And knowing that, to the point that both you and Ashley made, this is an individualized decision based on the ability to ensure support and that training. All right, so you addressed slightly on this, but what concerns or misconceptions do you hear from families about having their student with a significant disability being included in the general education setting?
Well, Meredith, I would say that, in general, all parents want to make sure that their kids are safe and happy. That is just, part of being in the nature of being a parent. So I would say in particular, it can be challenging for a parent, especially a parent of a student with a significant disability, because they are concerned that their child might not get the right support. They are concerned as to whether their child will be accepted in the classroom and whether they will learn, and additionally, will there be an ability to expose to general education as they, do want to be and should be, and also modified that work if that needs to be. And one of the things we talk to families about are things you're going to talk about later, about the data about this, but also having to do with the fact that as a case conference committee, you can discuss those concerns, and that, as you also mentioned before, once your student grows up and the bus stops coming, there is not a segregated world, nor do we really want one. So we have to look at all of the third graders as being third graders and all of the sixth graders as being sixth graders, instead of necessarily leaning toward having different groups, even if they need additional support, perhaps in a different setting, where they are one class of group of students together.
First, a member of the school community and a member of that grade level community.
That's right.
And a gen ed student first. Thank you, Lesa. We'll come back to Lesa in just a little bit, but we are going to jump to Mary, who's going to be representing paraprofessionals from both her backgrounds, but also I should mention before I pass the mic to her that Mary has been facilitating these project success paraprofessional webinars. I know I briefly mentioned it earlier, but they are very beneficial and at no cost to you to enroll or share with your staff or paraprofessionals. So just wanted to mention that. Mary, do we have your audio?
Yes, we do.
Oh, good. There she is.
Thanks again for the plug.
Okay, and we're matching. No
Yes,
problem.
that's
All right.
So go ahead.
Go for it. No. So the first question, we'll just go right down the list. What message is important to share with paraprofessionals? Well, what inclusion is and is not?
I think that what I've noticed in doing the paraprofessional webinars, the most recent one was about high expectations and presuming competence. And from the responses, on the surveys, there's some confusion about what happens when a student that has an identified disability is in a gen ed classroom, and what do the expectations look like? Well, the good news is they're still high. And I think helping paraprofessionals to understand that first and foremost, we want students to receive all of the positive outcomes and to achieve the things that that they can have from being exposed to grade level content, and to be a part of the community that is the school. So rather than thinking of it like a student being placed in an environment where if they're not the same, then they can't succeed, because sameness is what's required. It's really more about that what are high expectations for that individual student? When they are exposed to grade level content, it looks different for them maybe, but it is a rich experience, and it's important that they have that same opportunity, and that they're the differentiated instruction piece, which most of the paraprofessionals who've been engaged in these courses have said they've seen that in their classrooms. So helping them to understand how that just makes a bridge for students, for every student to be able to participate in the general education classroom and to experience that sense of community.
Absolutely. The point you made about individualized high expectations, we know that it has to be individualized, and it's not the same as their non-disabled peers. And so I thought that was a really important point that you brought up.
Sure.
Concerns, you addressed them slightly, but concerns or misconceptions that you've heard. Part of that you had mentioned, but are there others that you've heard to address?
I think one was just the blanket statement that it does more harm than good for students with identified disabilities to be placed in general education settings, and that we need to give them content that's below grade level just because they are not capable of doing it. And I think that's where, if we make that statement, right, if we make those assumptions and we don't presume that students are competent and that we don't know what that competence level is, but we're looking, we're exposing them to curriculum and engaging with them and allowing them to explore and look at the content, then I think just to make blanket statements, they can't. It's a good idea for as a paraprofessional to kind of remove that from your vocabulary, and then work with the cooperating teacher saying, I'd like to be a part of, what this plan is, and would be glad, to see how I can be a part of helping to have high expectations. And what does that look like for me? I think that guidance piece is important, because there are assumptions that are being made just because, maybe haven't had the experience yet of seeing students really succeed in that general education classroom. And
Absolutely, absolutely. Ashley always says, instead of saying I can't, it's I can't yet. And that's a great point that you said. How, as the paraprofessional, can you help support that? I can't yet, but there's a plan that we can put in place. So I thought that was a really excellent point. I know we've already plugged the paraprofessional webinars. Do you want to just speak just slightly to those?
Sure. There are 5 in the series. We have already recorded 3, and they are available on our website at www.projectsuccessindiana.com. And if you go to webinars in the events tab, then you will find access to our paraprofessional webinar series, and the resources are there to accompany them. There's a webinar activities form that you can engage with the content from the webinar to make sure that you're tracking with what's going on and that you're retaining what's happening. And then you can also receive a certificate if that's something that your district requires for completing the webinar and the webinar activities form. So the next one is October 14th, and that will be around formative assessment and instruction. So looking forward to digging into that content for our paraprofessionals.
All right, thank you, Mary. Well, we're going to come back to both Lesa and Mary in just a minute, but we are going to pass the mic over to Erica. There she is. All right, Erica. We'll just kind of work our way through these questions. I did put them up on the slide just for our participants to be able to see. So we'll pass you the same question. What message is important to share? And you work with general educators and paras and families alike. So just address that first question. What message is important to share with all of the community about what inclusion is and is not?
So when I thought of this, I first started to think of the setting I'm in currently. I'm in a junior-senior high school with several students that are in high school classes. So my general education teachers and my families are all thinking, oh my gosh, these gen ed classes are credit classes. We can't be going out into credit classes, like it's going to destroy it. These other kids have to get their credits. This is not feasible. And I said, whoa. Not an issue. We're going to be totally fine. Like, give me a chance. Let me try this. Like, don't tell me no. Let me give me 9 weeks and let me see how we can do it. And like 2 of the classes that we tried out the first go round for some of my students that were not just elective classes, but like core content classes were biology and preparing for college and careers. And I had parents that were calling in going, why do you have my kid in preparing for college and careers? They're never going to college. And I have no idea if they're ever going to have a career. And if they are, it's going to be supported. And I said, legit concerns, but bear with me for 9 weeks. I'll even give you 4 weeks. Give me 4 weeks. And if it's a total train wreck, I'll make changes, but please give us a chance. And within 2 weeks, they were calling me crying, so happy about the things their kids were coming home talking about. They're like, my kid's bringing home all these like college fair things and like from the colleges that are coming to visit during lunches. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, they're there during lunch. Anybody's allowed to go up to the table and get it. They're like, but they're not going to go. And I said, but some of these colleges have programs for students with disabilities. And guess what? They went with a friend from class. I didn't go with them at all. They initiated the conversation on their own. They went and said hi. And they're like, no, they didn't. You took them. I said, no, I didn't do anything. I had nothing to do with this. They came back. They were so excited. The visitor to our school gave them a pen and a sticker, and they were thrilled to death. And the parents just started like bawling on the phone with me because their kid had never gone and initiated a conversation with a complete stranger on their own. And I said, see, you thought preparing for college and careers was a complete bust. Look at what your kid just did.
Yes.
I said, now, do I think they're going to go out and apply for college? No, not tomorrow. But hey, look at what we got in 2 weeks. And then in biology, they're like, they're never going to understand biology. They're flying with colors. Our biology department is just like over the moon with the conversations and the connections that are happening. They're passing out ideas to other gen ed teachers saying, hey, this is what I did. And they're like, there's no way you had this student doing that in biology. I know what you have to do in biology, and there's no way they did it. And I said, well, okay, let's be real. Yeah, they're turning in a Google form for this activity. We talked about it together with the student. The paraprofessional did, or I did, or the biology teacher did. Then we typed up what they were going to fill out. But this kid's goal was to match the letters from the answer to go in the response to find the letters on the keyboard. There were no spaces. There were no punctuations. We were purely matching the letters. But they still talked about the biology content, and the biology teacher was thrilled. They knew what it was. Like, they knew the intent behind that, and the student was still working on the biology content.
Sure.
So
talk a little bit about, you've talked about how you've built that biology aspect and that give me 3, 4, 9 weeks to help. What supports did you provide to the gen ed teachers and the paraprofessionals who were helping support the students on your caseload?
Yep. So I meet with all of our paraprofessionals that are out in classes with students before they go out, like before the beginning of the year, to make sure that we've gone over the needs for the students. And then in my building, we have created accommodation binders, and every student with a disability, no matter what level of disability, has a snapshot of whatever information from their IEP and helpful tidbits and notes and things from their teacher of record. And every gen ed teacher that works with that student has that information. They also have access to their IEPs. But then I have gone and set up meetings with all the gen ed teachers working with those students as well. Some teachers want to meet before they see the students. Some have requested, let me get to see the kids and then meet a couple weeks afterwards so they can get an idea of the students. But if there's an assistant going with students into class, they've had a meeting and have specific instructions of what is expected of the student to begin with.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to pass. Thank you, Erica, first of all. And thank you for those examples, because I think those conversations are the starting point with our families. I'm going to pass the mic back over to Ashley. We're going to hear from Lesa and Mary and Erica in just a minute for one more round of discussion. But Ashley, I'm going to flip the slide and the floor is yours again.
Okay. So I just wanted to share a few more tidbits here of information and then get back to our panel, because I think that's really going to be the highlight of today's session. But if you have joined us before, you may have seen this slide. And it really is, the point is just to say there's a lot that goes into this idea of implementing inclusive practices, and the legislation, the research, teamwork, all of that, of course, is important. But today, primarily, we're talking about mindset. But I wanted to at least sort of point out that it's not only mindset, although that's very important. We also have to sort of keep in mind these other pieces. But we really want to be thinking about what we can do to share the message. But if you want additional information on these kinds of things, as we've mentioned our website before, we have other recordings that we've done that go into those topics in a little more detail. And actually, in the spring, we're going to have another whole webinar that will address just that element of teamwork. It's going to be called Collaborative Practices to Increase Student Outcomes. So anyway, just be on the lookout for that. But keep in mind that the mindset is just one piece. So I told you to look out for the Navy box. Here it is. We're wanting to hear from you all. What are some of the biggest barriers that you've encountered, whether you are an educator, special educator, gen ed, your administrator, whatever your role is, what are the biggest barriers that you've encountered when sharing your inclusive mindset? And then what challenges could you use additional supports to address or overcome? And let's see if we can either kind of crowdsource or find some things that maybe would benefit from additional resources. If you're comfortable unmuting and want to share your thoughts via unmuting, that's great. If you want to share it in the chat box, that's great too. What are some of the biggest barriers you've encountered, either when sharing your inclusive mindset, or maybe what still lingers in your own mind as a barrier to this idea of an inclusive mindset? Seems like we have some shy folks today, or lots of thoughts. We certainly touched on some in the panel discussion already. Some of those barriers about, families thinking, good grief, what do you mean they're going to be in gen ed? Don't you know they're never going to college, and all of this. So I think some barriers, just sort of the already set mindset of these families or the paraprofessionals and so forth, that just, it's hard maybe to chip away at some of these mindsets that have already been there for a while.
We will leave open the chat box to give you some time to think about that, or if as we're continuing to share, if something comes to mind, we'll refer back to that. So feel free to continue to type up your biggest barriers or what supports you may be looking for from this group. It's a great group and it's a great panel. So if you have it, just jump into the chat box and share.
Yeah, we'd love to crowd. Oh,
sorry.
No, I'm glad. Hello.
I know one of the biggest barriers so I work as a school psych, that I run into is, so when we come down to these issues, especially discussing the LRE, there seems to be this kind of inverted, what's kind of like, they want to do what's best for the kid, and always referencing that they need to provide that more restrictive setting is always assumed to be what's best for the kid, and trying to convince folks that trying more inclusive practices may be what's best. And obviously there might be times when a more restrictive setting may be the better option, but that just seems to be the default around even just kind of more milder disabilities, not even though the more significant issues. So that's kind of the biggest barrier that I think I run into. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think you're spot on with that, there's sort of this idea among a lot of people that that segregated setting is automatically somehow providing either more support or some kind of specialized support. And of course, many times they are, but that's not the only way that a student can either get more support or more specialized support. Those things can come through in inclusive settings. Does it take some more sort of coordination and preparation and things like that? Sure, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. So just sort of being able to talk through those things, that it's okay to get a student with a disability in a gen ed setting. It isn't a complete, unstructured, chaotic mess. We can provide the student structure and supports and accommodations and all these kinds of things within that inclusive setting, and that is doing many times what's best for them, and sort of almost weighing, even if you are able to glean some benefits from that self-contained setting in one way or another, making sure we're always thinking about what are some of maybe those downsides as well, and making sure we're balancing those to the best of our ability. Really good point. Thank you for sharing. I'm seeing a couple in the chat box as well. They can learn and control behavior, or teaching and working with behavior in the class can be done. And the mindset of parents about what their child can and can't learn. Yes. I have a parent that says the child can't do certain things, and I challenge him and see he's doing way more. Yes, we've experienced that a lot. Actually, one of Erica's colleagues has a great story about a parent who was pretty sure that her child would never read, and of course now she's reading, and it all comes down to what you put in front of them and what you give them an opportunity to experience and how you support it, and sort of not making assumptions too quickly about what a student is or isn't capable of. Really good points. Thank you everyone for sharing. Let's go ahead and keep moving, but if there are more thoughts that you have, please put them in the chat box. We definitely want to hear from you, but I also don't want to cut off our panel. So real quickly, just wanted to share this resource with you. So the slide is the top half of a graphic, and the next slide is the bottom half of the graphic, but I found it to be a really great resource or way of explaining why this is possible, or why this is a good thing, right? That we can have students who are experiencing the same kinds of things, the gen ed setting or being exposed to the content, but it maybe not in an equal way, right? So when you consider this example with students who have different needs as far as medical needs, I scrape my knee, my stomach hurts, all these different needs. What if a doctor said the same thing to all of them, gave them the same thing, that it's equal, right? Here's your cough medicine. Only one of those students there would get what they need, and that's not fair. It's equal, but it's not fair. So as Meredith flips to the next slide, when we consider that or sort of carry that over to the education realm, it's the same thing, right? There are students who have a variety of needs, trouble focusing, need for movement, being able to write, all these things. And each of those needs to be addressed maybe in a different way, right? So students should be getting different things to help them succeed. And that's what makes everything fair for everyone. So the resource here on this slide to be able to share is this actual poster. It's not cut in half, it's the actual poster, but it's a free printable for you. So if that's something you feel like would be a useful resource to you, you can share that with others from that link there. We've already sort of touched on this a bit in different conversations and things we've had, but just wanted to sort of point out in one slide here that what we consider to be the building blocks of an inclusive mindset. We've mentioned already presumed competence is sort of that foundation, and then least dangerous assumption and having high expectations. And as Mary touched on earlier and really explained quite well, that having high expectations doesn't mean having unreasonable expectations, but it does mean sort of stepping up the game for all of our students. And so I wanted to just real briefly talk about each of those. The idea of presumed competence, so believing that a person is capable of growth, right? It's this idea that what we see on the surface is not necessarily everything that exists, right? That's where this absence of evidence quote comes from. Just because we don't have evidence of something, we don't have evidence that a student is learning or capable of a particular skill, that doesn't mean that we have evidence that they don't have that skill or they don't have that ability, right? Those two things are not the same. So that's sort of presumed competence in a nutshell, is that just because we don't know for sure what you're capable of, we're going to go ahead and present you with the content. We're going to expose you to these things because we don't know for sure what you're capable of and what you'll take in and what pieces you might put together later and so forth. So the resource here that you can share about presumed competence is a real quick read, a 3-minute read on 2 ways that you can always be presuming competence. Least dangerous assumption is the next building block here. Meredith, if you click one more time, I'm not sure why that's all separate like that. The idea of least dangerous assumption is very similar to presumed competence, and it's essentially when we don't know for sure what a student is capable of, that we as the educators make decisions that will ultimately have the least harmful impact on a student and on their ability to sort of independently navigate their life in the future. So these are the 2 scenarios that I always think through in considering this idea What if you assume students can learn? So you give them every opportunity, and it turns out they can't learn. And I always talk about there's this magical brain scanning technology, right? Because I just got done telling you, well, we can't know for sure what they do and don't know. But what would happen then, right? We assume they can learn, we give them every opportunity, and it turns out they can't. What harm has been done then? Not much. But if you reverse that and consider that, you know, a teacher who will assume students with intellectual disabilities can't learn, so we don't give them every opportunity to do so, but then it turns out they can. Maybe it was in a different way, or maybe they needed more repetitions, or they needed a different scaffold, or, right? There's so many different ways we could address it. But what if we started out with that assumption that they can't learn? What harm would have been done then? Quite a bit, right? In terms of their ability to continue growing their skills and all of that. So that's the idea of the least dangerous assumption in a nutshell. When you're not sure what a student is capable of, you want to do what's ultimately going to have the least harmful impact on them. And always for students with intellectual disabilities, that's getting the content to them, finding ways to make it accessible. The resource here that we have to share with you is another kind of article called Outing the Prejudice and Making That Least Dangerous Assumption. That one is really, the wording is really nice in that one. It's very just sort of down to earth. Hey, here's what we're talking about when we're talking about making the least dangerous assumption. Nope, go ahead. And then that last one, high expectations, doesn't mean the same as unreasonable expectations. I like this sort of graphic here because I think it does a good job of showing that when we're talking about high expectations for our students, we know that they may not meet them. Our gen ed students may not meet the high expectations that we have for them, but if we automatically start from a lower bar with those low expectations, no one really feels compelled to go any higher than what's expected, right? If I've met your low expectations, I'm good, I'm fine. But when we raise those expectations, we make room for students to grow. So even if they never reach that high expectation, we've made room for them to reach for it and grow and make progress toward that high expectation. And that red arrow is what that's signifying there. So that's what I want you to remember from this slide, is that red arrow, and that even if a student can't make that high expectation, we have made room for them to grow. And it's that room that is so important for those students. The resource that I have for you here is a preview from a film by Dan Habib. He's a wonderful filmmaker. This film is called Intelligent Lives. The preview is what I have the link there to, but it just does a great job of showing students with intellectual disabilities as sort of in that senior plus that Erica referenced, getting into that young adulthood, and how their lives have been impacted by having competence presumed in them and having the least dangerous assumption made for them, and what that ultimately looks like for them. It's a really great film, and that preview does a good job of summarizing it.
Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just go ahead and skip this slide, but actually, would you mind just adding it to the chat box? And you may answer it there in the chat box and put your ideas there. And then when we get to the QA section, we can continue to address some of those. So sure. I'm going to jump back to Lesa, and we're going to share just a few takeaways before our panel leaves us today. So we'll have Lesa join us here. And Lesa, if you could share with us just a couple of resources that you suggest would be most helpful to teachers to share with families as we're providing that outreach piece.
Well, actually, I think this PowerPoint would be wonderful to share because it really does go along with the whole thought process of high expectations, presumed competency, challenging opportunities, and community. So to be honest, these are the type of materials. Additionally, I would say, especially in Indiana, Sandy Cole and Harvey Murphy's study about the fact that students with disabilities had much better results by being included in the general education setting, and in general information for families so that they can be part of the team about the benefit of inclusion. Because in general, we want everyone to think about where is the very first least restrictive place we should consider. And then we take a look at other settings. So helping them to understand as their child just even comes in to school, perhaps from early intervention, that should be what we think about first. You shouldn't be having to earn your way in. It should be, where do we best support you, and where do we both support your needs and your ability to be part of this community and learn. So I believe it is really important for families to start out right in the beginning, knowing that their child has the opportunity and even the right to be able to participate in education and be supported. And then, as we were talking about, what would that actually look like? So giving down to earth information, great examples of, well, this would be some of the ways that your child would be supported in that class, even though you think maybe biology, how could he do that? Well, let's take a look at what it means to gain information, and maybe it might look a little bit differently, but what would that look like?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lesa. We love having you on.
Yeah.
So
I love being here.
All right, let's pass the mic to Mary. And Mary, takeaways of resources and any advice that you may have for paraprofessionals.
So I think the most important thing for paraprofessionals is the opportunity to have open communication with the cooperating teacher, and to understand kind of where their role is in communicating with any other stakeholders in this process. Because being able to improve their communication skills working with the general education teacher, as they're supporting the student in that setting, and also having really clear expectations and instructions from the cooperating teacher. One thing that a lot of the paras gave us feedback on from the webinars that we've had, and we had one on effective paraprofessional teacher communication, was the rolling agenda. Being able to set a time that you meet with the cooperating teacher, go over expectations, talk about different things that have come up regarding students, and then you continue to use that same agenda and add to it, so that you always have clarity around what you want to talk about, whatever those points are, and then also being able to look back and make sure that things that you discussed or action items that you had as the para, that you've done them. So I think that is one of the resources. And we've already said that the webinars are available, but certainly reaching out to Project Success through our website and letting us know if there are other resources that you're looking for, things that you're interested in finding information about. And I'm sure we have connections and other places where we can help you to identify those.
Absolutely, thank you. And like Mary mentioned, we do have that rolling agenda on our website, so we can share that, and it is also part of that webinar. Thank you, Mary.
Yep.
All right, last but not least, Erica, just some takeaways, what resources and advice do you have to share?
I would say for resources, I have completely delved through Project Success's website like crazy. And every time I go back, I'm always finding something new or something I have forgotten about. And it sparks something that reminds me of something that I can reuse or use again in a new way with a student. So remembering to go back and just refresh your memory of things that are out there. Continuing to go to webinars like this or something similar are always helpful. I mean, I've even been scurrying down notes myself today, even though I'm a panelist, because I'm like, oh yeah, I should be saying this, or I should have been sharing this with this teacher, or why wasn't I doing this for that kid? Making sure that you're always looking for things for yourself, I think are helpful. But communication is the biggest thing from the educator's side. You've got to communicate to the parents, to the students, to the other educators, to the paraprofessionals. And if anybody in that whole circle feels like they're not getting a piece of that communication, it all kind of crumbles. And one little piece out of that is going to make the whole inclusion piece fall apart. And make it unsuccessful throughout it. So as much as communication is important throughout all of special education and everything that we do, it's really important to make sure that everyone in the process feels heard from. I know I said that I make sure I meet with all of my paraprofessionals that go out into classes with students before the school year starts. But that's not the only time I meet with them. My goodness, like it's a constant, make sure you have your phone on you, although don't have it out during class because that's a no-no for our district. But if we've got an issue, you text me and you let me know so that I can tell you how we're going to address it. And if texting isn't working today, we're going to email. And if that really doesn't work, you tell that teacher you need to step out and make a phone call, because our communication needs to be key or everything's going to fall apart. Send up smoke signals, whatever it's got to be, that communication has to be there, or all of us don't work. The gen ed teacher isn't happy, the parents aren't happy, the student melts down, you know, like it all just falls apart. So if we communicate and that's the only thing that we do, then I'm happy. Because
in collaboration,
nothing happens if they're not, if people don't feel communicated with. And that's where we've had the most success. I mean, even when kids are like, I don't have a clue what we're talking about, and then like 2 days later they're sitting here during their break time and they're chatting it up about whatever they were doing in class, and I look at my assistant and I go, what class is that one from? Because I don't remember talking about it. And they're like, oh my gosh, that was last week. And I'm like, fantastic. Look, they absorbed it.
Yes, and if you hadn't presented it, it goes back to that presuming competence and that least dangerous assumption. Had you not presented that and made an assumption, that conversation would have never taken place, and they were grasping the concepts. And I think that ties it all together so nicely. And to your 2 points of communication and collaboration, we know that those are the foundation. So finding the time and making sure that you build that time in the beginning with your paras, but also throughout. And to Mary's point around the rolling agenda, those are excellent ways to stay in contact and to continue to revisit goals and tasks that were assigned. All right. So thank you, Erica. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Lesa, for your time today. I also want to be mindful of everyone's time on this webinar. So I'm going to go on ahead and jump right to just some additional upcoming opportunities, and then leave with our information. We will also hang out for just a couple minutes. We'll shut down right at 4:40 today so that we can continue moving forward. But I did want to be able to honor the ability to ask questions. So some additional opportunities, Ashley mentioned it earlier, on November 4th, the Best Practices for Inclusive Instruction opportunity is there, and there's a registration link. Again, visit our website. We reorganized it, so our information for educators and our information for administrators is all organized, so you can have some quick links to get the information that you need. And also InSources is insource.org if you want to get some information from Lesa and her team, insource.org. All right, thank you all. We will keep the chat box open. You may always email myself or Ashley, and Mary's email is on our website as well to connect with her. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook with those 2 social media handles right there. And if not, we'll keep the chat box open. We'll go on ahead and shut off audio. Thank you again to Mary, Erica, and Lesa. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your feedback and your honest conversation today. And I appreciate learning along with you. So we'll turn off video and we'll keep audio going. We'll keep the chat box open and we'll stop recording. Thank you everyone for joining and taking time out of your busy schedules. So appreciated.
Hi, will we get a copy of this? This was excellent.
Yes.
I'm sorry for unmuting myself. I put this in the chat box. I just wanted to. Yes. Will we get a copy of this?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we will upload it onto our website, so you have access to that.
Yeah, I heard you say that earlier, so that will be the way that we're going. Okay.
We'll send you a direct link. Absolutely. Thank you for asking.
Yes, ma'am. I thank you so much. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you for coming.
Goodbye. Thank you.
It was wonderful.
Lesa, good to see you. Erica, good to see you again.
I
time
always
no see.
love being part of the webinars and love all the great information.
Mhm.
And